So maybe one question. So one thing that I'm always struggling with, and it's also a little bit in the debate, is sort of the understanding something through data that is there, sort of correlationally, and then sort of thinking about really understanding it from a causal perspective. And I think this is something that I've been working with data from a big organization, and then what you have is something that is just correlational, and then we're trying to convince them to actually try to do an intervention, but it's not always easy. And I was just wondering, in terms of publication perspectives, to what extent do you need this causality in your papers to really show that this is actually what is going on, or is there is it or is correlational, is that enough, or how would you, or where would you think then to push further in your research, maybe?
AMJ, come on. Answer that question.
So I think one of my favorite mantras from the data science industry is data are stupid. If you leave data alone and you kind of start to look for patterns and you don't have direction, the interpretation and causal inference is absolutely essential. And causal inference is almost always there. Sometimes people try to take shortcuts and say, well, this is positively associated with that, just to kind of get around the accusation that they're not going to test it appropriately and get causal inference. But it's almost always there in our theories. And so it's important to rise to the occasion to attempt to get the evidence for it. So, methodologically, I had actually talked earlier today in an earlier session. I actually think certain types of archival data that are available now allow for all the different criteria for causal inference, or at least getting some of it, namely the temporal ordering of the IV and the DV, randomization, and some control over the predictor. So you can actually get that. Econometrics, scholars have been dealing with this for a while, but that opportunity is available. You don't always have to run a field experiment or a lab experiment to test your hypotheses. That said, some of the best work, as we know, complements really cool, advanced, big data sets with vignette experiments. I don't think there's anything wrong. That paper I mentioned earlier that I accepted last year coupled a large data set from Malaysia with a online study from Prolific, and they just ran a vignette, and it was on its own, it would not have passed muster, but the idea is that it's complementing and providing extra buttressing of support for their hypotheses. It was really compelling. So either way works.
Agreed.
Any other comments from the online panelists?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that from my side, I have no idea whether causality is needed to publish papers, but I can for sure say that causality is needed in organizations. Of course, that is something that we need to get to. It's not something that's well understood. And that is what I meant really when I talked about operationalizing experimental research. So it's very common for practitioners to pilot things, but not in any way where there's any real understanding of what good experimental design is, and particularly experimental design that's going to get to the idea of causality. And that, I think, is the crux really of the introduction that I made, that in order to do that, we need academics, as Kevin spoke about, really getting on the front line, so that when workplace change interventions are put in place, rather than just piloting them or even just rolling them out, actually being able to say, well, let's test whether that works, and being able to frame that for why that's good for the organization in terms of cost savings, right? You don't want to roll out something that doesn't work. And in terms of really putting your investment for the best bang for your buck, if you like. There's multiple ways we could potentially solve this issue. Let's work out across alternatives, which is the most effective, and put our investment behind that.